It's 6:20 p.m. in India, and Saudi Flight 763 is approaching the runway to take off for Dhahran. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan Airlines IL-76 contacts the airport controller.
Good evening. This is 1907. We are 75 miles from Delhi, requesting permission to begin our approach.
Good evening. You may begin your descent to flight level 150.
150, thank you.
November 12th, 1996, Shymkent International Airport, Kazakhstan. It's nearly 3 p.m. at this small airport, where an Ilyushin 76 from Kazakhstan Airlines is preparing for takeoff, bound for Indira Gandhi Airport in Delhi, India. Originally conceived in 1967 as a military cargo aircraft, the Ilyushin 76 was designed to take off and land on unimproved runways while carrying large payloads across the Soviet Union. It featured a high-wing T-tail design, ideal for short takeoffs on dirt runways, a large cargo hold that could be fitted with passenger seats, a rear ramp that could open mid-flight for paratrooper deployment or airdropping supplies, and a hermetically sealed interior that allowed for separate pressurization of different cabins. Flying on this aircraft wasn't particularly comfortable for passengers since they traveled in seats fitted into the cargo area, but it was an inexpensive way to fly. On this flight, 27 passengers were aboard, all of them merchants heading to India to purchase large quantities of textiles, which they would later resell in their home country. They didn't have a set return date. They would decide to return once the plane was filled with stuff. At the controls of Flight 1907 was Captain Alexander Robertovich Cheparov, 44 years old with 9,229 hours of experience, 1,448 of which were on this type of aircraft. Joining him in the cockpit were 4 more crew members, as the Ilyushin 76 required a team of 5 to operate. The Ilyushin's cockpit was split into 2 levels, making the aircraft challenging to fly and communication among the crew more difficult. The 4 other crew members included a co-pilot, a flight engineer, a radio operator, and a navigator. 5 flight attendants completed the crew. In total, there were 37 people on board Flight 1907. At around 3:05 p.m., the Ilyushin 76 began taxiing down the runway. The takeoff proceeded without issues, and they set course for India. The co-pilot was at the controls. The flight was expected to last around 3 hours and 10 minutes. By 5:50 p.m., as they approached Lanka, a waypoint located 177 miles from Delhi, which connected them to Airway G452 that would lead them to the airport. A 747 from Saudi Airlines was awaiting its final passengers at Indira Gandhi International Airport in Delhi. Flight 763 of Saudi Arabian Airlines was scheduled to depart at 18:30. This majestic jumbo jet was headed to Dhahran on the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia, carrying 289 passengers, mostly Indian laborers and hospitality workers seeking better opportunities in Saudi Arabia. Among the passengers were also some Muslim pilgrims connecting through Dhahran on their journey to Mecca. The flight crew included 23 members, with the cockpit crew composed of Captain Khalid Al-Shubaili, First Officer Nazir Khan, and Flight Engineer Ahmed Idris, all of whom were quite experienced. At 18:20 in India, Flight 763 of Saudia was approaching the runway head for its departure to Dhahran. Meanwhile, the IL-76 of Kazakhstan Airlines was contacting the airport controller.
Good evening. This is 1907. We are 75 miles from Delhi, requesting permission to start the approach.
Good evening. You may begin your descent to flight level 150.
150, thank you.
While the radio operator of the Aviation spoke in English with the airport controller, the rest of the crew communicated in Russian from the upper part of the cockpit. The radio operator relayed the instruction to the co-pilot to descend to 15,000 feet and also converted the altitude into meters, since the co-pilot's altimeter only displayed in meters. At 18:32, the 747 initiated its takeoff. It lifted off without issues and began heading west toward the Lunka waypoint. Saudia's flight, climbing along airway G452, the same airway that Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 was flying in the opposite direction, received its first instruction from the controller after takeoff. Ascend to 14,000 feet and maintain. Despite Delhi Airport having only one airway shared by both arriving and departing flights, the controller maintained a safe separation between the aircraft, 1,000 feet, or about 305 meters. The controller then contacted the Aviation again.
You have traffic at your 12 o'clock. A Saudia 747 at flight level 140. Confirm if you have visual contact.
While the radio operator received this message in the isolated part of the cockpit, the co-pilot could be heard asking, "What flight level did you say?" Meanwhile, the rest of the cockpit crew continued chatting in Russian. The radio operator, who had stood up to check if he could spot the 747 through the large window, after finishing his conversation with the controller, replied to the co-pilot, 15,000 feet, without giving the altitude in meters. It's important to note that the radio operator couldn't verify the flight's altitude, as he didn't have an altimeter.
"1907, we don't have it in sight yet. We're reaching FL 150 now."
However, this wasn't entirely true, as they were actually at 16,400 feet and descending. The operator picked up the radio again and asked how far away the 747 was. The controller replied, 8 miles, level 140. At that moment, while entering a cloud layer, Flight 1907 reached 15,000 feet, but mysteriously continued descending. The crew should have known they weren't authorized to descend below this altitude, but for nearly 30 seconds, no one said a word as the altimeters ticked down toward 14,000 feet. The radio operator then spotted the Saudi plane on the horizon, heading straight toward them. Not understanding what was happening, he shouted at the pilots, "Hold at level 150! Don't descend! Hold at 150! Realizing the mistake, the co-pilot immediately applied full power to all 4 engines in an attempt to ascend. It was too late. With a horrifying crunch, the IL-76 slammed head-on into the 747 with immense force. The two left engines of the Boeing collided with the left wing of the IL-76, causing a massive explosion, followed a split second later by a secondary collision when the 747's left horizontal stabilizer sliced through the vertical tail of the IL-76. For a brief moment, the two planes continued moving forward, engulfed in a tremendous ball of fire before both began to spiral downward, plummeting in a death spiral from 14,000 feet. The wreckage of the two planes fell about 7 kilometers apart. No one survived this devastating tragedy. In total, 349 lives were lost, making it the deadliest mid-air collision in aviation history and the third deadliest aviation disaster overall after the 1977 Tenerife disaster, which claimed 583 lives, and JAL Flight 123 in 1985, which resulted in 520 fatalities. Though a building was destroyed by falling debris, miraculously, there were no casualties on the ground. What had happened? Why did the Ilyushin keep descending to 14,000 feet? The investigation, led by the Indian Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, in collaboration with the NTSB, determined that the primary cause of the crash was the unauthorized descent of the IL-76 to flight level 140 and the failure to maintain the assigned level of 150 given by air traffic control. Several contributing factors to this unauthorized descent were identified, including the crew's poor command of English and a lack of cockpit resource management skills by the pilot in command, exacerbated by a lack of leadership. Another key factor was the absence of altitude callouts by any crew member, which could have informed the captain of their current flight level. While the co-pilot's altimeter was in meters, the captain's was in feet, adding to the confusion. It was also determined that Delhi's outdated air traffic infrastructure played a fundamental role in the tragedy. Delhi's radar systems were obsolete, as they only tracked aircraft position but not altitude. This is why the air traffic controller was unaware that both planes were on a collision course. Additionally, the civil airspace over New Delhi had only one airway shared by both departing and approaching aircraft. The Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision led to the mandatory incorporation of a system that has since saved many lives and prevented further disasters of this kind, the TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System. TCAS is an independent onboard system that communicates with the transponders of other aircraft, predicting their flight paths. It warns of a potential collision and suggests corrective actions in case of danger. At the time of the accident, TCAS was only required in US airspace. Moreover, this crash led to significant changes in both procedures and infrastructure in Delhi's airspace. A new radar system was installed, capable of measuring aircraft altitude. New air corridors were also created, ensuring that departing flights no longer had to share the same airways with incoming traffic,